Good morning and welcome to today's release event for the first ever Nation's Report Card for Technology and Engineering Literacy. Thanks to all in attendance here at the Michigan Science Center, and thanks to those of you who are tuning in to our webcast. I'm Terry Mazzani, Chair of the National Assessment Governing Board. The Governing Board is a nonpartisan organization created by Congress to set policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, also known as the Nation's Report Card. The results we'll reveal today show 8th graders' performance nationwide on NAEP's Technology and Engineering Literacy, or TEL assessment. Until now, there has been no way for our nation to assess the ability of today's students to solve the big problems of tomorrow. This assessment presented students with real-world scenarios to assess their ability to understand technical principles, solve problems, and use technology to communicate and collaborate. These are exactly the type of thinking that the modern world demands at home, in the workplace, no matter what a student chooses for their career path. Before we begin, I want to share the schedule of today's program. The first session will feature a presentation of TEL results. Then our panelists will take your questions and discuss the unique nature of this assessment. We'll take a short break. The second panel will discuss the importance of technology and engineering literacy to solving real-world problems and address how students will need to apply these skills in the workplace. With that said, let me introduce our panelists. We are joined by Tanya Matthews, a governing board member and president and CEO of the Michigan Science Center, our gracious host here today. She will act as our moderator. Peggy Carr, the acting commissioner for the National Center of Education Statistics, or NCES, will present the assessment results. Scott Osterweil, the creative director for Education Arcade, a Massachusetts Institute of Technology, will offer remarks on these findings and the nature of the assessment. Then perhaps the youngest panel the Governing Board has ever welcomed, we have a group of 8th grade students from University Prep Science and Math Middle School right next door to the Michigan Science Center. They will reflect on the experience of trying a technology and engineering literacy assessment. Next, Bill Bashaw, Executive Director of the National Assessment Governing Board, will join us during the Q&A session. I also want to recognize Carrie Schneider, a governing board member who is vice chair of the board's Assessment Developing Committee and a guiding force behind this assessment. I also want to recognize the founding guiding leadership provided by Alan Friedman, who passed away earlier, but his spirit is definitely in this room as he was the guiding visionary who brought us to this point of a brand new assessment. Additionally, I want to acknowledge Eileen Weiser, a former governing board member who serves on the Michigan Board of Education. And we also have a special guest whom I'll introduce momentarily. We want to make sure that this event is a discussion with both our in-person and remote audiences. Webcast attendees, please feel free to submit a question for panelists at any time during the event. Just type your question into the chat tab on your screen and click send. In-person attendees will have the opportunity to ask questions during our upcoming question and answer sessions. If you need technical assistance with the webcast, you can also contact us via the chat tab. We also encourage you all to join an ongoing conversation on Twitter using the hashtag NAEP. Now, it is with great pleasure that I introduce Brian Winston, State Superintendent of the Michigan Department of Education. Please join me in welcoming Brian.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you in this exciting day. I'd like to welcome everyone to the great state of Michigan, to Detroit, and this wonderful facility of the Michigan Science Center. As it was mentioned earlier, I'd like to recognize Eileen Weiser, one of our state board members, and her husband Ron, whose generous support has kept the doors of this Michigan Science Center open for all Michigan students. Eileen also serves on the National Assessment Governing Board. I'm honored to be here today for the public release of the first ever NAEP Technology and Engineering Literacy Assessment release. For over 35 years, NAEP has been an important source for what U.S. students know in a range of subjects. The 2014 NAEP Technology and Engineering Literacy Assessment will provide important results and information to guide us as we move forward. Information that can be used to determine whether our nation's students have the essential knowledge and skills needed in the technology and engineering areas. This first-year test will serve as a baseline of what students know about technology and engineering, and it reveals how technology shapes students' lives. As we begin to implement our plan to make Michigan a top 10 education state, this type of computer assessment based on actual world tasks are part of our strategy. They are consistent with our vision for assessment problem solving because it's relevant, it's cognitively engaging, and challenging. It represents involvement in real-world problems using real-world methods to solve them. It's nice to see an assessment that actually engages students in real-life problem-solving scenarios. Not that there aren't reasons for academic goals, but this gives students an opportunity to integrate their skills in an engaging and challenging way. In retrospect, we need to give students more of these types of problems and challenges if we want to become a top 10 state. Here in Michigan, we have been very aggressive in getting our schools and our students tech ready. In the past 4 years, our governor and legislature have invested $164 million for technology readiness infrastructure grants and device purchasing in our schools, so we certainly thank the governor and the legislature. We began our state assessments online last year, and this year over 93% of our students are taking the assessment online. My vision for state assessment is similarly aligned with the focus we're here today, to have benchmark assessments in grades 3 through 8 with a writing component, individual, team, problem-solving exercises with writing in elementary and in middle school, and the SAT bank of assessments for the upper grades. There is such a demand for students with technology and engineering skills in the labor force. This gives them a chance to work with these skills in an integrated fashion. Hopefully, many more students can get interested in these areas through these new methods of assessing their abilities. It also may help our teachers think about how to present problems and how students think through their approach to solving problems as we want to get into more problem solving and real-world activities in our classrooms. So thank you, and I look forward to being here today and learning and participating with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Michigan is a global leader in engineering and technology, and so I think it's fitting that we are in your state to be able to release these assessment results. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Tanya Matthews. Cannot thank her enough for hosting the program here today at the Michigan Science Center. This is a perfect venue for this discussion, as the center provides the kind of rich, hands-on STEM experiences that are so important to our students' education. With that, let me bring Tanya to the stage.
Thank you, Terry. Good morning, everyone. Oh, just like the kids. And welcome to the Michigan Science Center. Here at the Michigan Science Center, we foster a love of learning through science, technology, engineering, and math, and whatever other letter becomes necessary to get the job done. Increasing all the way to this year, having our first ever artist in residence at the Michigan Science Center. Every year, we inspire nearly 300,000 curious minds of all ages with discovery, innovation, and interactive education. And that is why I am so proud to be here and to welcome you all and be able to be the host for the first ever release of a technology, engineering, and literacy assessment. These kinds of assessments are for those of you who do not have the blessing that I have, which is the ability to watch amazing children's minds explode all over the Science Center every day. And we get to see what they are capable of and what they are doing. The most incredible thing about this particular type of assessment is that it tells us more than what our students know. It helps us get a preview of what they are actually capable of. And of course, as Terry mentioned, Michigan is definitely the place to do this, and Detroit is a great epicenter to get this party started, because this is Detroit, and we build stuff. So with that, I'd like to introduce Miss Peggy Carr to give us a preview and walk us through the results. And I hear that she is in true Michigan Science Center fashion with some props. Ladies and gentlemen, Peggy Carr.
Thank you, Tanya. What a wonderful and inspiring introduction. I have a lot I want to share with you today, and I look forward to it. Oh my goodness, my glasses are broken. I can't read a thing without my glasses. Anybody have any tape? I just need some tape. Oh, tape. Oh no, yours are too strong. Tape? Okay, thank you very much. My goodness. You know what? The tape isn't working. I think if I had some glue or something like that, that would solve the problem. No glue? Okay. Well, you know what? I have shades. And these shades, well, they're like readers. So I'm going to, hope you don't mind, Tanya, I'm going to use these shades. You know, I still can't see a thing. But luckily, I have another pair of glasses. Problem solved. These are the type of scenario-based tasks, real-world problems that are presented to students in this real innovative assessment that we're going to see today. A little bit of engineering. Now, this is an iPhone. It's the latest in iPhones, I'm told. But this is a hammer, the latest in big box stores and hammers. Show of hands of those who think the assessment we're going to talk about today pertains to these type of devices. Show of hands. Okay. Show of hands who think maybe the assessment we're going to talk about today, I see a few hands, is about this hammer. Well, you're both right. This is the new, more broader way of thinking about both engineering and technology. But you know what? I can't say it as well as this award-winning video that I want to show you next.
Since 1969, NAEP has been telling us where students across the United States stand in different subjects. But classrooms have changed over the years, so NAEP is evolving too. The Technology and Engineering Literacy Assessment is just one of the latest innovations from NAEP. This new assessment is all about how technology is developed and how it affects our society and environment. TEL is cross-curricular. That means it draws from a variety of subjects. Since it's brand new for NAEP, it will serve as a baseline for understanding what students know about technology and engineering and the ways technology shapes their lives. That's TEL in a nutshell, but let's take a closer look. When you hear the word technology, what comes to mind? It's easy to think of the latest technologies, but what about the often forgotten everyday objects? Technology is any invention designed to make our lives easier. Now, take that hammer. At some point, someone needed a tool that drove nails into the wall and pulled them out. so a claw was added to the back. That's engineering. It's about improving technologies to make our lives easier. Technology and engineering are both involved in almost every decision we make on a daily basis. Technology is behind how we get from place to place, what's at our local grocery store, and even which shoes are in our closets. Do students realize this? Do they understand that the connection between technology and engineering affects everyone, every day? This new assessment will help us figure that out. TEL is a new frontier for NAEP, so we're using new tools to gauge what students know. Students will take this assessment on a computer and will be given tasks based on real-world situations. Let's take a closer look at the types of scenarios students might see in each area. Students probably know how quickly new phones and computers are developed. But what happens to old ones? Do students understand that they can add up and have a big environmental impact? Engineers use a creative and logical process to create the technologies we see and use every day. Do students understand the importance of different designs for different goals, even for something as basic as the wheel? Technology and engineering can be used to access, create, and communicate information. Can students use powerful new information and communication technologies to gather, analyze, and present information? These are just some of the questions TEL will explore. With this new NAEP assessment, we hope to get one step closer to finding out if today's students have the skills they need to function in an ever-evolving technological society.
As you just saw, technology and engineering is cross-curricula. The assessment is less about any particular subject and more about the ability to arrive at solutions using technological skills and engineering principles, and to communicate why a particular solution was the best solution. Taken as a whole, these three domains and three practices are intended to reflect this technology and engineering emphasis on this literacy. It's important to note, though, that this is an assessment designed for all students, not just technology and engineering students. In all three content areas shown here, students are expected to be able to apply particular ways of reasoning and thinking when approaching a problem in a variety of contexts. This first technology and engineering literacy assessment was designed for 8th graders and administered on laptop computers. From January through March 2014, 21,000 students, over 21,000 students in about 840 public and private schools across the country took this assessment. We have results for the nation overall and broken down by various demographic groups. We report average scores overall and for each of the three domains I just described and each of the three practices. We also report the percentage of students reaching 3 achievement levels set by the National Assessment Governing Board: basic, proficient, and advanced. We report responses students provided about their learning opportunities, as well as in-depth results for specific questions in the assessment. Before I dive into the results, though, I want to describe the unique design of this assessment. It took about 60 minutes. About 2/3 of the time was spent on rich, real-world technology and engineering scenario-based tasks, and about 1/3 on stand-alone items, which also, well, they were digitally based and also very innovative. The assessment included survey questions were given to the students and to the administrators to provide context for understanding the results. On the website, you will find 4 scenario-based tasks that have been released as part of this assessment. Each task is representative of the content areas assessed entail. In the Chicago task, students build an online museum exhibit for middle school students about Chicago and how it addressed its water pollution problem in the 1800s. In the bike lanes task, a city is encouraging its citizens to use cycling as a form of transportation. Students need to apply the engineering design process to come up with a route designed for the best, safest bike lane. In the iguana task, students help troubleshoot and fix the habitat for a classroom iguana named Iggy. You'll hear more about this iguana in just a little bit. In the recreation task, a local company has offered to build a new rec center for the town's teenagers. And some business owners are not very happy about that. And students volunteer to create content for a website promoting the benefits of the building and the recreation center in general. There were 11 discrete tasks released as part of this report card. Here's an example. Students were asked to compare the environmental effects of alternative technologies and provide reasoning for which choice is best. An example would be the hybrid versus the gas vehicle. These descriptions, I must admit, are pretty vivid, but they really aren't sufficient in describing what students were asked to do. So I have one more video I want you to see.
TEL assesses students through interactive scenario-based tasks. Each student will spend 60 minutes responding to a series of tasks and questions. Let's take a closer look at an example of what a scenario-based task might look like. Here's the challenge. The student plays the role of an engineer and is brought into a remote village to find out why the local water well has stopped working. The student is not expected to have any prior knowledge of wells or hand pumps, but is challenged to use the information provided to get to the root of the problem and figure out a solution. First, the student talks to an engineer to get background information on how wells and pumps work. Then, the student works to identify the cause of the problem. To find out this information, they talk to a person who lives in the village to learn more about the situation. The student is then asked to apply what they have learned to identify whether the problem is caused by a water shortage or by a pump malfunction. Since rain has recently fallen and people living in nearby villages have been able to draw water from their wells, the student concludes that the pump is broken. Students are then asked to consult a repair manual within the task to help them troubleshoot to fix the pump. The manual lists a variety of possible symptoms and potential repairs. Using this, students demonstrate their ability to think through information shared within the task to locate and repair the problem with the pump. Finally, once the student has fixed the pump, they are asked to evaluate the best way to keep the pump in good repair in the future. The point of a task like this is to measure how students apply real-world troubleshooting skills.
So, just how literate are 8th graders in technology and engineering overall, and by various demographic groups? One key finding, I'll give you a hint, is that girls score better than boys. Unexpected? We'll see. I have more about this in just a moment. At the right side of the score line, you can see the percentages of students who perform at or above proficient. 8th grade students performing at or above the proficient level should be able to understand the interactions among parts within systems, systematically develop solutions, and contribute to teams assessed virtually, using common and specialized tools to achieve goals. This is just a snippet, though, of the complete description of performance at the proficient level, but I should note that performance at this level is a rigorous standard. As you can see, 43% of students in the nation perform at or above proficient. Male students scored 149, female students 151, excuse me. A higher percentage of girls were at or above proficient as a result. It's clear that on average, girls have the abilities and critical thinking skills to assess and to be able to succeed in fields of technology and engineering. There are larger discrepancies we see in this chart as a result of the race-ethnicity comparisons. The average score for white students and Asian students was 160. For black students, it was 128. And for Hispanic students, it was 138. We also have results for American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islanders, and 2 or more races. We can see how these score differences translate into the percentages of students in each group at or above proficient level. In this assessment, this is the first time we've done TEL, so no trend results today. We also have results for students' school location, their eligibility for the National School Lunch Program, which we use as a proxy for socioeconomic status, whether they attend public or private schools, and whether they are identified as having a disability or being an English language learner. We see the gap related to socioeconomic status is the largest gap among those different students groups shown here. Students eligible for the school lunch program scored, on average, 135, while those who were not eligible scored an average of 163. There were also gaps based on school location and between public and private schools. English language learners had the lowest score, the lowest average scores shown here. Now, let's dig into the results by content area. As I said earlier, the fact that female students scored higher overall than males is, well, very interesting. As many of you might know, there are a number of initiatives in both government and private sector intended to create jobs and to push women into the STEM-related fields. Girls did best in the information, communication, technology, content area. And there were no statistically significant differences for 2 other areas, technology and society, and design and systems. But with the robust data available with the assessment, we're able to see that girls are excelling at collaboration and communication when solving a variety of technology and engineering problems. In 2 of the 3 practices, girls scored higher than boys, and in a third, there was no statistically significant difference. Now let's look at the gender differences through the lens of race and ethnicity. We see here that there is a pattern in which white and black female students score higher than their male peers, while there are no gender differences for Hispanic and Asian students. Now let's turn to survey results. One factor we wanted to examine was information about 8th grade students and where they were doing engineering and technology in schools and what types of classes and courses. As you can see, more than half of all students reported taking a class in technology or an engineering-related course of some sort by the 8th grade. We also wanted to understand from whom students reported learning about each of these content areas assessed. As shown here, a majority, 63% of students reported learning about building and fixing things from a family member. This is the sort of tinkering with machines and tools that students might do doing homework-based work. I assume the 8th graders are busily helping mom. As part of our analysis of students' responses to survey questions, we grouped certain answers to certain questions in a common topic and created an index of responses. In total, we created 6 of them. We created an index to assess confidence in performing TEL-like tasks, as well as how students engage in TEL activities in school and out of school. The chart shown here shows the relationship between students' responses about how often they engage in technology and society in school and their TEL performance. It's important to note and to keep in mind that while we can place these results in context of the TEL performance, we cannot assume a causal relationship because these 2 factors, well, there may be other factors involved as well. We can see here that 18% of students reported that they often perform a variety of technology and society tasks in school. These students scored higher on TEL assessment than those who reported that they sometimes, rarely, or never perform these activities. And that pattern held as we moved down the frequency categories shown here. We also found connections between what students do outside of school and their performance. We asked students about their design and system activities outside of school, such as the frequency with which they figured out why something is not working in order to fix it, or use tools or materials to plan or design something. Clearly, students who reported engaging more frequently in design and systems-related activities outside of school scored higher on average in the design systems content area than students who did so less frequently. This report provides a great deal of information I'm able to share with you today in this brief presentation. On the website, you can tour the tasks, you can try tasks yourself, you can explore more results based on the student's questionnaire, and compare student performance and the responses to survey questions using our TEL profile tool. I hope you will explore this site and that you will enjoy the experience of trying these tasks yourself. Now, I promised you would get another look at the iguana, Iggy, and here he or she is. And I have to tell you, I was going to take you through the tasks step by step, but I could not do the job that these students will do just later in our program. But before I let you go, I want to thank all of the students across the country and the teachers and the schools that volunteer their time to participate in the TEL assessment. And I also want to acknowledge the report writer and developer of the TEL assessment, Dr. Mark Berger, who's here, and the director of the program in my office, Dr. Bill Ward. Without their work, in addition to many, many others, what we're sharing today would not be possible. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions and answers at some point.
Okay, we can keep Peggy up here for just a moment or two. If there is one question, one or two questions that folks would like to ask to delve deeper into some of what we saw, please. And there is a microphone way up here in the front, just to make sure you are front and center and live across the world.
Thank you so much for sharing all the information. I just have a couple questions. One is, I just have a general concern about the testing of our children. We test them on everything, and so I'm curious as to how this coincides with the NAEP test that already gets administered. Is this a part of that, or is this another test that our young people are taking? And then what was the methodology around choosing schools? I noticed there were a lot of suburban schools. There were very few students that qualified for free and reduced lunch, and yet the children of color, the numbers in terms of performance were really low. So I'm curious around those two things, if you could share.
Well, thank you for your question. So, this new and exciting assessment that we're seeing here today is a part of a family of assessments. We, by statute, assess reading and math, 4th and 8th grade, every 2 years across the country. And we've been doing the reading and math, quite frankly, science and writing when we started many, many decades ago for a long, long time. But the governing board is concerned about having breadth and depth, not just the reading and math, in providing a picture of what students in this country know and can do. And so this is the latest in that portfolio. And given what is happening in our society, our world today, everything is about technology. What we do, what we say, how we live, our medicine, our cars, everything that happens to us inside school, outside of school. And so this is an opportunity to really align our assessment with the world. And if students are going to be competitive in the 21st century global economy, we need to know where they stand.
So this is another test?
This is another assessment. But I should point out, as I did earlier in my talk, it's only about 60 minutes, and we're in and out in that time and lickety-split. So we come in with our own equipment. We don't burden the schools or the staff with the use of their equipment. We bring our own people, they administered, and we're in and out. And there are other really important designs that the assessment has had for many, many years, where all of the students, they take a portion of the assessment, not the entire assessment, so that there's a reduction in the burden on any given student, but yet we can provide very reliable group level estimates. So I think we've done all that we know to do on the psychometric, on the design side, to reduce the burden on the students, on the participants who have volunteered and give us their precious time. Now, the design of the assessment on the sampling side is also well done. It's a complex sampling design. Students are selected across the country proportionate to size and their representation in schools and the types of schools, public and private, across the country. And no one is over-selected consistent with our sampling frames. Now, it might look like that in any given jurisdiction, but taken as a whole, these representatives are indicative of their representation in the nation. We have lots of materials on the website, and we even have a very user-friendly focus on NAEP that it describes our sampling design. I'll be happy to share that with you at some point. No.
What I really want to understand, what is the purpose of this assessment, and how is that going to tie into the new NGSS standards? In other words,
That's a good
what is
question.
it going to give us in terms of informing the science teachers of what our students are able to do? Because these tests are not really based on content, they're just based on thinking and relating real-world problems and how students react to such problems or such thinking.
Yeah, right.
How is that tying into NGSS, and how are we going to be preparing our teachers to kind of
Well, it's a really good question, and we've asked ourselves that. The National Assessment Governing Board members of the staff and myself met with the National Academy of Science, which really sort of were behind the new next generation standards, and they had a nice panel there, and we went through face validity what's in those standards and what's in this particular assessment. And we think there is an alignment, at least on the face of it, but we can't rely on that. And so we have an independent panel of experts that are going to do an empirical alignment between the next generation standards and this assessment as well as our science assessment. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much, Peggy. And Peggy will actually return for a panel where we're bringing our education and NAEP experts back up to talk to us.
I'm going to take my prompt.
Please take the hammer. Yes. Thank you very much, and I know some of us are still thinking up questions, and like I mentioned, Peggy will return for some follow-up questions. Now I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Scott Osterweil, Creative Director of the Education Arcade at MIT. That alone suggests that this might get interesting. He is the founder and creative director of Learning Games Network, where he leads the Gates Foundation's Language Learning Initiative. He is a designer of award-winning educational video games, working in both academic and commercial environments. He's going to talk with us a bit about how challenging multimedia tasks and games do indeed foster learning and develop important skills that we need for our students to have. Scott?
Thank you, Tanya, for the introduction, and I want to thank the governors for inviting me here. And I love it when I get put in a hot seat, getting to come and sort of respond in part to the assessments, just learning about them myself. But I want to start by asking you to imagine something. Imagine a child playing a video game. And you can imagine any video game you want. It can be a really a worthy educational game. It can be a really transgressive, violent video game. I don't care. Think about the kid playing a video game and think about what's actually happening. The kid is coming into an environment that doesn't make any sense at first. When you come into a video game, you don't know what's going on. There are no instructions. And slowly, by first observing, gradually probing, the kid starts to recognize that certain phenomena are occurring. And only if the kid begins to make sense of those phenomena and begins to organize further probing and testing will the child make progress. And over time, she's going to actually start to form a hypothesis about what's going on in the game and going to begin testing that hypothesis by trying only certain things, maybe even learn to control for single variables at a time. And eventually, she beats the game. She beats the boss. So think about that whole experience. That child is doing science. Or history, or engineering, or design. All those processes are involved in any good, interesting gameplay. In fact, I argue that you probably see it the least in some of the boring educational games that some of my colleagues make. But in fact, in any kind of authentic game, a player, a child, or an adult for that matter, is engaged in really deep thinking, deep systems thinking. And those of us who've been working in games for a long time have felt that, in fact, this is really the crux of what learning is. So, of course, a number of us have been working for many years, for 20 years or more, in developing games in which that kind of activity is happening around things that are also of academic importance. But I would argue that, in fact, really good thinking is going on even in games that have no academic content. We have seen examples of children who appear virtually illiterate in school because they don't respond, they don't do writing projects, going home, playing a game, and then writing literate 3-page walkthroughs of a game online, telling their fellow game players how to play. And what's going on here in all these examples that I'm giving? Obviously, it's about relevance. And I don't mean relevance just in terms of I do something that relates to an experience you've already had. Relevance can be a fantasy story, it can be Iggy the Iguana, something where via empathy, we begin, or imagination, empathy and imagination I think are the two keys, we begin to imagine ourselves in a new environment and begin to solve the problems that that environment gives us. And what's so exciting to me about what I've been seeing of these scenarios is that they begin to get at those same processes. of situations which may not be relevant in the student's past life. Maybe I've never had an iguana before. But because I can imagine an iguana, or I can imagine what the people in Chicago were thinking 100 years ago, I can begin to empathize, I can begin to be creative in helping solve those problems. And I think this represents an important step on the road toward doing more and more game-like and activities and game-like assessments. I don't want to argue, by the way, that games are the only method for doing this. I would really rather say there are lots of kinds of experiential learning that can happen, but games have been particularly good at organizing those experiences, and I think the designers of the NAEP have done a very good job of trying to take the best of what they can from gaming in terms of developing meaningful scenarios that might excite kids. I don't want to respond too much to the actual results, only because I'm not a demographer. I haven't had time with them. I'm not sure it's my area of expertise to talk about the results, but I do want us thinking about one thing. And that was the graph that showed that the more that kids had experiences in school around technology or thinking about technology, the higher their score. And of course, that is correlation, not causation. As I looked at it, I was thinking that that's probably not a perfect picture of those kids' reality. I would like to argue that the kids who report very low levels of communication or thinking about science and technology in school are nevertheless doing it in their lives more than we are aware. And I think games are one of those places where they're doing that kind of thinking. And I think the promising note there is that if we can, there's lots of ways in which we need to change and improve teaching and learning writ large. But I think one thing that we can do in the very short term is to begin to help kids relate their own experiences that they're actually currently having in their lives, including in their gameplay, to these processes. We never tell kids, that story that I told you at the beginning, that they're actually doing science. We never talk to kids about science and say this is what science is like. We never say science is like solving the kinds of problems you solve in games. And therefore, we know from the research that it's not just the experiential learning, but the processing that happens afterward, the conversation that happens afterward, the conversation with a mentor or a teacher or a friend that really cement that understanding. So I guess what I'm arguing is that kids are already having very meaningful experiences in their lives, which we're not bringing into school, which we're not using school to activate. And so I have a feeling, and I guess it's just a gut feeling, and researchers like me will have to go further into this, that in fact if we could spend more time with students looking at their own life experiences and helping relate that to science and math and engineering and design, making that part of our curriculum, we would see improved results. The NAEP sort of, I think, points toward the kinds of experiences that we ought to be validating, and we know that, in fact, children are having them in their lives, and so we need to be validating them more. We need to be asking kids, how did you solve this game? What problems are you solving in your home? Did you learn to fix your bicycle? What did you do at home around helping your parents around the house? We need to make that more part of their learning. I think if we can do that, we'll actually begin to see improvements. I mean, along with all the kinds of activities that we're seeing in schools that seem to be promoting higher scores, whether it's thinking about technology in society, thinking about communication. I think if we can validate more the experiences that students are having outside of school, making that part of their learning, we will see even greater improvement. But I am extremely excited to see the beginning of assessments that get at this kind of relevance in kids' lives, and that we're beginning to assess them in that manner. So with that, I guess I should take some questions.
So again, we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. He is barred from giving any secrets to World of Warcraft, so he cannot actually give you out the codes this morning. Oh, sorry. Yes. Wait, you're going to have to come up here to be a little famous. So we've got a question coming to the front.
It's more of a affirmation or just confirming what you said. Excellent. I'm excited. I do this in my classroom. It's very trendy right now, I guess, but unfortunately I'm a minority of which, not minority in terms of my race, but in terms of the thinking. I believe that children need to have this experience in the classroom. And I believe that they also need to marry the component of, like you were saying, thinking of how do we bridge the gap of them understanding they're already doing this at home. They have the smartphones at home. They have the technology. The parents have the technology. How do they bridge that and understand that what they're connecting at home and connecting at school can come together, and they can see the results in their thinking and solving the problem. So I just want to say this is awesome. Of course, it is always something that we can do better, but I just want to encourage the people, the presenters that came on. It's working, because I've seen it in my classroom and I've seen results. So I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Great. We need to hear more voices from the field because I hear that from teachers too. And when you read in the popular press about education, you rarely hear teachers' voices. You hear experts like me, but we really need to be hearing more teachers and students talking about these experiences. So.
TEL is very close to my heart as a former National Assessment Governing Board member, but I would like to find out, I've seen historical games in gaming. I'm calling on your education arcade experience
Yes.
here. What is there? Have you seen any gaming that can be applied to math or to English language arts or to other subjects that has fidelity to the subjects being explored?
So that's a good question. So there's been a fair amount of games around math. That's how I got my start. We've been doing games around math for a long time. I won't abuse the privilege and plug my own games here. Science, too. I would say history, there have been games like Civilization, but which I think is really good at getting at certain qualities around games, and anyone's interested in reading the work of Kurt Squire on that. On the use of a game like Civilization. But there also, I think, even a simple mystery game can get at sort of history, thinking about history, thinking about how you listen to different voices and how you assess the validity of different actors in a situation. Language arts is the area that I think we've done the least around. We're currently doing research funded by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, where we're using regular commercial off-the-shelf games in high school language arts classes, getting kids to read and write about their gameplay. We think that actually the kind of critical thinking that we bring to literary texts can also be brought to games. And so we don't necessarily have to make games about literature, although I think there probably can be and will be in the future good games about literature, but rather helping students understand that the same kind of critical faculties that they bring to assessing their own games is also meaningful, and that we could we actually see results of kids writing, as I mentioned in my earlier example, when the writing about a game is meaningful to them, they do better writing. And so it's something that we should be. The good news there is we don't only have to create new games around topics. We can work with the things that are already in students' lives as ways of enhancing their skills. So,
thank you.
Sure. We have any? Okay.
So thank you very much, Scott. Ooh, adults clapping for games. Nice. So now we're going to move into our first panel, which I think that the second panel is going to find very difficult to follow. We have created this really unique experience, and we are extremely excited to welcome a group of 8th graders from University Prep Science and Math Middle School right here located, connected to the Science Center. And they actually got to take a portion of the TEL yesterday, and then we talked about what it was like, and I'd like for them to share some of their thoughts with you. We are welcoming up Torrance Henry, Marvin Price, Noelle Shields, Brianna Campbell, Jaden Hamilton, and Giselle Motley. Good
morning.
Good. Thank you, Torrance. Okay, so as a quick reminder, as you're speaking, everyone is really interested in hearing what you have to say, so you'll always lean into the microphone and talk to us. So my first question is, we've talked a lot about the test and what that was like, and I think people sort of have an understanding. You were put in a scenario. We're going to save Iggy. This is explaining the stuffed animal on the conference table. But as I was thinking about it, so we are trying to help an iguana be happy in a cage. What does that have at all to do with technology or engineering? Torrance?
Well, it has to do with like technology and engineering, because the latest technology we have, we can use that to make a better environment that's closer to the iguana's natural habitat. And engineering is taking a problem and solving it. I didn't really know that until I took this test. I thought engineering had to do with like cars and stuff. Okay. So when I took this test, the problem is Iggy's not really happy in his environment. So we had to take the latest technology that we use, like, let's say, do you really want me to like spoil some details?
No, don't spoil the details, because they're gonna go on the website. They're gonna take the test.
So like, we're using some technology that helps. I want to say it, but like.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
One example
Give
was
one example,
the misting technology that we have used. Since iguanas that we learn from the facts that they give us, they absorb water through their skin rather than drinking, so they like excellent swimmers and stuff like that. So the misting technology allows them to absorb water through his skin.
Thank you. Jaden, would you like to add to that?
It took a lot of today's technology and helped improve on like how taking the iguana and improving its habitat.
Yeah. So as you were taking the test, we talked a bit about the fact that the test gave you the information you needed and then asked you to use it. Would one of you like to share what that was like, actually getting the information and then having to use it? Not yet, Torrance, not yet. We're gonna let some folks. Giselle?
So before I took the test, I didn't really know like anything about iguanas except for the fact they were reptiles. So when they gave us the facts, I kind of just incorporated that into how I was going to solve the problems for Iggy's environment and make sure that it was a safe and comfortable environment for the iguanas. So.
Okay. Brianna, would you like to add to that?
When we were making the cage better for Iggy, you kind of had to use the facts that they gave us, and like how would you, like if you were an iguana, how would you want to live in a cage? And yeah.
Not yet, Torrance, not yet. So a couple of folks, Torrance and Giselle, have both actually mentioned that while taking the test, they learned something. Is that what taking a test is usually like for you guys? You usually find that you learn something while taking the test? Noelle?
Yeah, a lot of times when we're taking other tests, the test tends to ask what you already know, and they don't state a lot of facts that you might not know already. And sometimes it's hard to stay focused or to be interested in the test, but this test, I learned a lot more about iguanas and about how to use those facts to solve problems.
Marvin?
Okay, so taking a test for me, it's most of the stuff that I already know, and when I take it, it's a lot easier for me to answer the questions. And other times, it's normally just like questions that are like way above my grade level that I don't really understand, so I can't really comprehend it, and that way I can't learn anything. But with this one, it's got like a mixture of stuff that I don't know and stuff that I know, so I can incorporate into the test and ultimately get it right.
Jaden?
Okay, yeah. The test, yeah, it helped me learn like a lot more new things because I'm more of like a visual learner, and it was like a visual portion of it, so that really helped me like play it out like how it would be if I added something to the cage to make it better for Iggy.
Okay. Torrance?
Okay, so to add on what she said about the visual learning stuff, a lot of kids learn in different ways. So some kids like her, visual learners, I like to learn from a page, so I can just watch a blank screen with writing on it. So that's easier for me. And then some kids learn both ways. So when they give you the facts, like the videos are really easy, like to take all that information. And when they give you all them facts, you feel more confident about your answers. So when you're answering it, usually on a normal test, you be like, they just gave me all this. I don't really know what to feel. I really just want to get done with this test. But with this test, I feel like I want to take my time with my answers and do them all correctly, and I feel good about it.
Okay, teachers, I think, are appreciative of that part. So I have a question for you guys. So yes, the test gave you the information that you needed and was really trying to test how you would use that information to solve problems. But did any of the information or concepts that you were working with on the test remind you of things that you had been working on in school or had classes about, but you could see in a different way? Jaden?
Yes, when they explained how, like, can I say, like, okay. So we had to replace the metal walls on Iggy's cage with plastic, and it was still like too cold for her in the cage. And so they had showed us like how the wind is, how the air is, warmer air and cooler air. It reminded me of convection currents that we was learning.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Giselle?
So I take an engineering class at school, and we do a lot of problem solving and things like that. So when I took this test, I felt kind of like, oh yeah, I know how to do this, because like I learned how to problem solve when I'm in this class, like early on in the year, and we do a lot of things that are related to the test. So it kind of helped me like understand, okay, this is what I need to know, instead of me just sitting there with a blank face. But, yeah.
So that's related to school. How about anything in the real world, in your life, in your backyard, in your home? Did anything that you're ever dealing with on an everyday basis remind you of anything you were doing for Iggy? Brianna?
So when I was outside of school, I went into this program, and they just taught us about, they gave us a question, and they gave us like a few tools to answer it. And you try multiple times until you get it right. Like you try different solutions. So, like if the misting thing didn't work, we would have to try adding another bowl of water. But just to continue trying and trying till you get it right is like practice for when I get old and then get a job.
Torrance, she meant older. Torrance?
What she said she took a class outside of school. I don't really have any classes, but I do like a lot of problem solving. So I do like a lot of things that happened in my life that I learned lessons from. But let's say this morning, right? So I have a hard time coming to school early or on time because my brother just won't get out of bed. So that's a problem we have to fix, right? So I have to take different solutions. I want to be the nice guy, give him an alarm, but the alarm just doesn't work, right? So we have to try something else. I'm thinking, what will make him wake up, like give him a shock like the alarm would, but wouldn't make him want to go back to sleep? So I thought water. Just pour water on him. He gets the shock and he can't lay down because the bed's soaked.
Well, Torrance, that is clearly problem solving. So I have one more question for you guys. So several of you have talked about how it was easier for you to pay attention to the test and you felt more engaged and actually interested in the test, and you were also learning at the same time. Not all tests are like that, right? Does it make a difference whether or not you think the test is interesting when you're taking, okay, we like this question. So I tell you what, we'll just start here and we'll go all the way around as part of the closing remarks. Giselle.
Okay. So when you're taking the test, and it's the difference in taking like a regular standardized test and this test, it's like a standardized test, it kind of evaluates you and you just don't want to be evaluated sometimes. And this test, it got interactive with you, and it made you think that you were actually in the classroom with the pet, like trying to help the iguana like survive in its habitat. And I felt like it helped me mostly because now I feel like I'm more confident with how I can solve different problems now. So yeah.
Thank you. Jaden?
Okay, so on like standardized tests, it's like just a blank white screen with that one question, multiple choice. Like that's doesn't grab my attention. It doesn't make me really interested. So I like zone out into another world because it loses my attention span. I guess it's short or something. But yeah, it gets boring after a while, and I just be like, skip it. I would put whatever.
Brianna?
When we do take the standardized tests like MAP and MSTEP, there are many long passages, like very, very long. So to read all of that and keep focused at the same time is kind of challenging. But on the test that we took yesterday, it was there like a few short sentences on one page, and then you go to another page, and it was like a question with a few more sentences, and it was like that for like most of the test. So they didn't give me enough boring stuff to lose my attention.
So Marvin, Noel, and Torrance, I'm going to change the question a little bit for you guys at the end. After taking a test like this, what do you think this kind of way of giving you a test tells your teacher about what you know and how you think about things?
So if my teacher would have given me this test and I was required to answer the questions, I feel like I would be able to give more of what I know as well as the information that they're supplying me with, because with the other tests, they're not really asking you what you know. They're giving you a question, they're giving you some answers, they're giving you this long passage to read, and which one of these questions, of these answers this question based off of this passage. But with the test that we took, it was like typing, so we put in our opinions, we explain why, and we give information that we know as well as what the information they gave us. So I think that would give my teacher a lot more of what I know.
Thank you.
Kind of like what Marvin said, with this test there was a lot more writing, so I could kind of use my prior knowledge and show my teachers, even like my English teachers, what I had learned about like vocabulary and writing to kind of explain these more engineering questions, which I think would help my teachers a lot.
Thank you.
And yeah, I was going to say vocabulary too, because I want to be an author and stuff like that. But also, this also shows my teacher that I can solve these type of problems, and she can give us like different, more engaging assignments like in class. Because normally, I don't want to call out my science teacher, but it's just really boring in that class. So if she gave us like something more engaging, and that I could show her what I could do more, because a lot of kids in there, they're probably really smart, but they don't have the chance to show what they're really capable of, because they don't have really anything engaging to do.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the amazing students, University Prep, Science and Math, Torrance, Marvin, Noel, Brianna, Jaden, and Giselle. One more time for our fantastically honest, with the political correctness in our environment, ask an eighth grader. That will be our new standard. I'd like to invite Peggy and Scott back up to the podium and the stage here. And I'd also like to welcome a new member, Bill Bishaw, Executive Director of the National Assessment Governing Board, who is actually no stranger to Michigan education community. So really, we're welcoming him back home. Bill was the Learning Systems Director at the University of Michigan's Merit Network, Deputy Superintendent and Chief Academic Officer at the Michigan Department of Education, and Director of the Michigan North Central Association. So honestly, we just let DC borrow him to get a couple things right. So we're having an open question and answer session now. So for folks that would like to come up to the microphone to ask a new question or a question that you did not ask. Also for those folks who are watching us live via our web feed, you can type your questions into the area on your screen, and we'll see if we can get to those as well. And we've got Greg, our internet question moderator, in the back of the room, who will also help us. with our questions. So with that said, while folks are pulling their questions together, I'm going to give Bill a chance to give us some reactions to what he actually heard from the students and what we've seen so far today.
So you're right. Being on this panel after the student panel is very difficult. But what we heard, the governing board talked about putting an assessment like this together many years ago, and then worked very closely with Peggy and her shop, and in particular ETS. We talked about Mark's contribution, and one of our hopes was not only to establish and put a spotlight on technology and engineering literacy, and to establish a mark in the sand, a line in the sand, to see where our students are, so we can monitor progress. But the other part of that was to demonstrate for educators all across the country that there are other ways to assess these skills, really thoughtful, engaging ways to assess these skills through the scenario-based task. And you really had a chance to hear firsthand the reaction of our students to that opportunity. And we're hoping that more and more we can make that transition to the new kinds of assessments that Scott has been working on in his research, and that Peggy was able to put together. So Tanya, I think I can speak on behalf of the governing board. We're just delighted to have that kind of excitement around an assessment. To think that you can engage in an assessment and feel close to Iggy here is very special.
You see we have folks right there. Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I just, observation is sort of a question, but the disparity in the way we look at how students have learned on this assessment mirrors what we've learned about math and English assessments, and that is we do a really poor job of funding education in a creative way for students of color in this country. And if you're lucky enough to live in the suburbs, you're probably going to do better in all of these areas. And so I guess the other thing that I'm curious, rather than correlating this assessment to other assessments, I'd really like us to just jump to the action stage, because it just reaffirms what I think we already know. And Scott, your comment about imagination and experiential learning, I think, are the key takeaways from this, is that we have to help kids develop their imagination, and I think we do that in school with art classes and various types of hands-on learning. And I'm the parent of 2 public school students. They get none of that in school now. My children have to be they have to have those sorts of experiences outside of school to get them. And so I would just like to say, you know, let's use this as a platform for action, and let's not spend a whole lot of adult time correlating the test to other results. Let's just kind of get on with it. Or
My task is to direct from that, not really sure where we'd like to go. Scott?
I have a comment. I sometimes get invited to visit other countries. Some of them countries that score very well on some of these the students score very well in these international tests, but they're always asking, what can we do to make our students as innovative and creative as we see American students being? And I think that what you mentioned has been, I think, our secret weapon over the years. And I think a lot of it has had to do with the fact that historically, at least, particularly in the earlier grades, education was more inventive, more creative, less test-driven than it has been over the last 20 or 30 years. And in fact, we're seeing statistically that the measures of creativity on some very long-running standardized tests have been going down roughly over the same period of time that we've been emphasizing more and more testing in education. I don't mean assessments like the NAEP. I mean the kinds of standardized tests that kids are mostly subjected to. So I think on some level we've got to rediscover our own mojo. We were good at this for a long time, and we've got to sort of recapture that. I think that this is a step in the right direction with the NAEP.
Thank you.
So, with my former experience on the governing board and now serving in my 13th year on the State Board of Education, I have to say that I too am greedy. just like the last questioner. I see that assessment has to follow knowledge and instructional practices in the schools, but I also see now with TEL how innovative and how exciting a new assessment, a new format can be. And I have to ask all of you what this implication has had for the rest of the assessments that the governing board gives.
Peggy, you want to?
Well, I have to couch my response by saying that we have been dabbling in interactive tasks for a while now. So the scenario-based task was not our first stab at this. We have hands-on tasks where kits where students can actually conduct experiments, and we've now combined those with in what we call hybrid tasks with tablets, so that it is more like what happens in an actual lab. We have interactive tasks in our science assessment where students can run experiments in real time, blow up things, or do whatever you would normally do in a science lab, but not have to worry about the consequences in that way. So these scenario-based tasks that you see here was not our first time out of the gate. But it is different, and I was very interested in hearing what the students had to say, because we struggled about what we call the leveling part of it, placing students at the same knowledge base as they matriculate through the task, and you seem to like it. So that's very, very encouraging for us. Moving forward, Eileen, to answer your question specifically, we're looking at SBTs for reading, mathematics, although we think social studies might be the next one on the block, because lots of opportunities there.
First, I would like to thank the students for speaking about the issues that they're dealing with and how they would like to, do better on testing. My question is for you all in reference to getting students more involved in technology. I have the pleasure of working with students at Central High School and Durfee Middle School here in the city of Detroit. And we just recently embarked on a field trip to Rocket Fiber Internet Company. And I'll tell you, Scott, one of the things that I noticed was the students became more engaged from that experience than any of the field trips I've taken them on. And from that experience, I've taken upon myself to make sure that we're not just going to let that fire and energy that they feel from that experience die out. And so as we began to look at, I think primarily we've been focusing on how the education realm can be a part of this, and how they can better push our students to be ready for the future in terms of technology, career jobs. I want to know, how can we more so get companies involved in a, unorthodox way? Let's say, such as Rocket Fiber Internet Company, who has agreed to work with our students and create in a free personal handheld game device that they'll be able to not only construct with 3D printers and things like that, but they'll also be able to program. And so as we began to get more into how we can get our students prepared for those job vacancies in technology in the next 10 years, we also, could start to think about how can we get our business community involved in this in ways that they want to be involved in. And as they understand that this is a asset for them in the long term as well. And so I guess that's one of my biggest questions. How can we encourage the business community or independent groups to be more involved, like Grand Circus Detroit, who currently has offices here in this city, and Code Lab and DAPSET and all these other great programs that are also trying to bridge that gap?
So there's an organization in Washington, D.C. called Change the Equation. And it is a collection of large companies across America that are trying to figure out how they can be more supportive of schools across America in the STEM area, math, science, engineering, and technology. And they have become very big partners in getting the results of this particular assessment out, not only to their members, these large companies, but also just across America. In fact, they have an event coming up next week, which you can also, there's an in-person component, but you can also attend via webinar. I think it's on Tuesday. And they've gone into some of the information about experiences that students have both in school, out of school. They've looked very carefully at some of the issues about gender differences. And so we know that's a great example of how an assessment like this can put a spotlight on technology and engineering literacy so that others can respond and marshal the resources that we need for our students and teachers.
Charlonda Buckman again. I work with Detroit Parent Network. We serve 25,000 parents across the city. And so when we looked at the assessment, one of the things that it showed is that children who had more experiences at home did better. Scott, you also mentioned in your comments that things that happened at home mattered in terms of young people doing well. And so I guess I want to go back to one of the things that the science teacher mentioned. One is how are we going to leverage this assessment to really drive changes in the classroom and provide school teachers who teach science with more tools, but also what are we doing to take this assessment to develop a parent toolkit or something? I know many of our parents are always looking for ways to keep their kids smart over the summer when you look at summer learning loss, to help bolster what they don't get in the school systems. I think somebody just mentioned that. And so before we move on to the next assessment, how do we make this assessment matter for children?
Well, I guess we all could respond, but let me say that we took a big step forward when we released those 4 tasks that I described. You can imagine this is not an inexpensive endeavor, but we made the commitment because it was important to give people access to these types of tasks. You can go on there, you can, teachers, parents, they can experience these tasks, they can see what the answers might be for students of different backgrounds or experiences. There's just a wealth of information there. And you can actually take it as a test. The teachers can actually formulate it in the context of a test. So we've done, I think, a lot to expose people to these types of tasks. I think it will then be incumbent upon us to figure out a way to make sure that people know that these data are there, that these types of tasks are there.
You asked sort of, I think in some ways, this $64,000 question. I mean, how do we really make change happen? One of the things that some colleagues and I are trying to do is develop, I don't know whether it will succeed, but a public service campaign with a slogan, something like, "This is what learning looks like," which is just reminding parents of the things that they did in their own lives that were learning that may not have happened in school, or that happened in field trips, like the last questioner mentioned. To go back to my earlier comment, just validating the ways in which people actually are active learners that we don't tend to validate in school. And so I think parents frequently want to see their kids come home with good report cards, which is understandable. They want to see what they're doing in school, but they don't necessarily have the tools to help their own children and themselves understand that the learning is happening all the time, and that all of life is about learning. And so somehow to encourage parents to get on board with lifelong learning, I think, is a big piece of it.
And I think we're going to invite our last question up, and as she comes up, I'm going to switch from moderator to, hey, board member, leader of the Science Center hat, which is to also say, I'm sort of also resonating with the sense of urgency, the what are we gonna, what are you gonna, and I want to encourage us to also answer the question, what am I going to do sort of with this information? We had a young man that explained to us that he could figure out how to save Iggy because he had to pour water on his brother's head this morning, and he related that to engineering and technology problem solving. So yes, I want to say that exposure to technology and access to places like the Michigan Science Center that really works hard to do that is important and critical, but it has never been and will never be the only way that our children are able to explore these opportunities. The onus is really on us. We also do have to do a lot of education around the teachers and the parents and helping us to understand and be that instructional facilitator. I might guess that Torrance's mom didn't say, wow, that is an incredible piece of critical problem solving that you did there by pouring the water on the head this morning, but perhaps we could make that the first half of the sentence. Thank you.
I just wanted to, well, first of all, commend you on this piece. But one thing I haven't heard a lot of is about the younger child. And I think, you know, when we begin this assessment and we talk about testing and so forth, where and how are you going to approach the learning and the development of the young child? And I'm not just talking the early, you know, ages 1 to 3, but I'm talking about your kindergarten, first grade, second grade, because this is an area, these children will drive what happens every place else, and the world is their playground. And they are not afraid to put their hands on things. But what has happened in our teacher education is we tend to, for example, go to the 8th grade student, but are you also looking at assessing and interacting with the first grade or second grade student who will probably give you a lot of insights of how things can be changed or done that will then impact the continuum?
So let me, I'm so glad you asked that question. That's a great question. The assessment was given this year to in 2014 to 8th grade students. But the hope is eventually that we can give this assessment to 4th grade students, 8th grade students again, and of course 12th grade students also. And we have the National Assessment Governing Board, prior to creating any assessment, develops a framework. It's kind of a guidance on the kinds of things that we want to assess. And so we developed one for technology and engineering literacy. It's available at our website. And not only does it have the guidance for the 8th grade assessment that we gave, but it also has guidance for 4th grade and 12th grade. So it's a resource that educators and others across America can go to and get and take a look at what are the things that students need to have experiences in, opportunities to learn when they prepare for the 4th grade exam or also for the 12th grade exam, which we hope to give sometime in the future.
As the commissioner, the acting commissioner for the National Center for Education Statistics, we have a lot of programs from cradle to grave in which we collect data. We are the 3rd largest federal statistical agency in the country responsible for the collection of education statistics in this country. And what I can tell you is that our early childhood assessments, our data collections are beginning to look at these types of tasks, and largely because programs like NAEP and some of the international assessments that we also administer through my center, the OECD and the IEA assessments, are looking into these more interactive, based, technology-based, 21st century-based types of data collections. And so I think you're going to see more of these types of tasks moving forward.
I want to thank everyone very much. The wonderful thing about all of this technology and the live broadcast means that more people can share in this experience, but it also gives us some really hard stops in terms of when we have to take a break. So we are about to take a break for about 30 minutes. We encourage networking and coffee drinking, and we hope that the folks online will join us. As we depart, I would like to say, as it's sort of an overarching kind of thing to think about as we move into the break in the next half of our day, is that this is not an indictment. What we are looking at is a new horizon of different things we can do and different ways we can look at. We are looking at tools that empower our most creative teachers and our most innovative informal education facilities, ways to understand how we are part of the education ecosystem and how we are impacting the way that our children are engaging with this new world and new information. There is not a silver bullet. This is about expanding our portfolio. What you are not aware of is that our panelists, our young panelists, were anchored by a future writer, in our young man Torrance and a future engineer in our young sister Giselle, and both were equally engaged in having this conversation with us about technology and engineering and literacy. And what we heard in the middle, I think, was most key, that said that this kind of assessment allows us to show our teachers more about what we know, more about what we're learning, more about what we don't understand yet. And at the end of the day, that is all we are asking for. We are asking for, in addition to the toolbox, that teaches us more about what we have taught our students and what they would like to learn next. I will see you back in 25 minutes. Thank you.
Welcome back to our discussion about the first ever release of the nation's report card for technology and engineering literacy, or TEL. For those of you just joining us, I'm Terry Mazzani, Chairman of the National Assessment Governing Board, which sets policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP. Earlier this morning, here at the Michigan Science Center, we announced the results of this groundbreaking TEL assessment, which presented students with real-world scenarios to assess their ability to understand technical principles, solve problems, and use technology to communicate and collaborate. We now have with us an esteemed group of panelists who will discuss the importance of technology and engineering literacy to solve real-world problems and address how students will need to apply these skills in the workforce. There will be a question and answer session after the discussion. And if you're participating through the webcast, at any time you may enter your question in the chat tab on your screen and click send. Please include your name and organization with your question. You can also use the chat tab to let us know if you're having technical difficulties, and we will work to assist you. Remember to join others in Twitter in talking about the findings using the hashtag NAEP. Before the discussion begins, we have a special message from U.S. Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. One of his priorities is funding science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, or STEAM, education to help keep America's students globally competitive. Let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Senator Gary Peters. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to say a few words and congratulate all of you on this exciting release of the first ever Nation's Report Card on Technology and Engineering Literacy. Technology and engineering literacy allows us to participate intelligently and thoughtfully in society and the workplace. By creating a metric to measure how students use and evaluate technology in real-life situations to solve real-world problems, we can ensure future generations have the knowledge and skills that they need to innovate, create, and succeed. That is why this report card is so important. Technology and engineering play a critical role in solving our nation's challenges and moving our country forward. For America to compete in the global economy and remain at the forefront of innovation, we must continue to focus on technological education and training. It has taken hundreds of experts in education, assessment, technology, engineering, and members of the public a decade to develop and launch this assessment. And all of this tremendous effort has resulted in a valuable measurement that will help keep our workforce thriving and our economy competitive. In closing, I want to congratulate the National Center for Education Statistics and the National Assessment Governing Board once again for developing this innovative and groundbreaking assessment.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Carrie Snyder, a member of the National Assessment Governing Board. On his day job, Carrie is the Associate Research Professor at the Center for Science Education at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. He is a Planning Committee co-chair for the 2014 NAEP Technology and Engineering Literacy Assessment Framework, and he will conduct He will connect what we have discussed during the first panel about technology and engineering literacy to the implications for this workforce and job skills discussion. Please welcome Carrie to the podium.
Well, thank you very much, Terry. I'm delighted to be here, and as a board member, I add my welcome and thanks to all of you for being here today. As a segue to our second panel, I want to remind you of one of the interesting questions asked at the prior panel, and that is, if students are given all the knowledge they need to solve a problem, for example, all of the requirements that Iggy needs to live, then what's the knowledge that students need to have? Aren't we just measuring their native intelligence and ability to solve problems? Well, there is a lot of knowledge involved. So there are three areas of the TEL, the Technology and Engineering Literacy Assessment. One of those areas, for example, is design and systems. So students need to learn that whenever there's a problem to solve, there's a whole system involved. And if you change one part of a system, it's going to change other parts of the system. With regard to design, design is actually a systematic process with various steps to it. It's really important for students, for example, to identify the problem in terms of criteria and constraints for a good solution. And if you don't prioritize those criteria and constraints, you don't know how to make trade-offs or how to make really good decisions. In the area of technology and society, it's really, really important for students to learn that every technological decision we make has implications for society and the environment, and that very often there are unanticipated side effects. So it's our job as designers and engineers, whether or not we have those official titles in life, to anticipate to the extent possible what the effects are going to be. We have an environment that's really important to protect for ourselves, for our children, our future generations. So those sorts of questions need to pervade education at all levels. And then the third area, ICT, information and communication technology. Students not only need to learn how to use the tools, not only today's tools, but the ones that they're going to encounter in life as new technological tools are developed, but they need to be able to understand when you're communicating, to work collaboratively, to communicate well, to anticipate how another person will receive what they have to communicate, how to give credit when you're borrowing somebody's ideas, and how, when you're doing research on the internet, to understand that not everything you read is necessarily true, and how to go about vetting that information. So there's a great deal of information that students need to learn, knowledge they need to gain, both in school and through out-of-school experiences, in order to be effective problem solvers. So it's not just what does Iggy need to live. It's this much deeper and much broader set of knowledge and capabilities that it's our job as educators to provide. So that's the challenge for our next panel, to think about how this applies in their real world. And with that, I'm happy to introduce the moderator for the second panel, Virginia Edwards. Virginia is president of the nonprofit organization Editorial Projects in Education, which is the parent company of Education Week. Ginny has been editor-in-chief of Education Week since 1989. Then in 1997, she launched edweek.org, which draws nearly 3 million visitors a month to hear the latest news and innovative ideas in pre-K through 12 education. Ginny, it's all yours.
Good morning. So, this is one of these times when I prepared a lot for this, and I'm realizing I'm throwing a lot out on the fly. Isn't that a 21st century skill? Being nimble and agile, because I'm so taken with these results and the applicability that I want to really give it its due and put my energy there. And I have two ways of underscoring that point. At Education Week, which maybe many of you know, some of you know, we have launched a new line of coverage that I think intersects with this work quite profoundly. And it's a bucket of stuff that we just kind of clump together. Student engagement and motivation, school climate and culture is in that bucket, and social and emotional learning. Do you know no group of content that we publish gets more pickup, is accessed more than that group, those pieces of content. And my point would be that there's something about being solution-oriented in what people are looking for, and also people recognize that this is really an effort in general in improving schools and improving student outcomes. Kids have got to be engaged. They've got to be motivated, and it's got to be relevant to them, because if it's not, and we heard it from the kids earlier, so I just wanted to say that, and I'm throwing everything out that I had prepared to be able to move into our panel discussion. We don't have much time, and there are 5 folks up here, so this is going to be quite the lightning round, and I've asked them to be super brief in each time they talk so we can get as much ground covered as possible and keep this engaging and entertaining. We'll have time for Q&A, and so we'll like to hear from you all. So I'm going to ask each of these folks to introduce themselves by their specific place, but also their industry or their sector, and if they would kind of address the first issue, which just is, given that a lot of people associate these issues of technology and engineering literacy solely in the construct of STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, and math, and some of you certainly, or virtually all of you are, but all kids need to understand the processes and the mindset that you all would say you bring to your work. So let's start down at this end. Let's introduce yourself and talk about the importance of this kind of way of thinking about connecting education and kids to the real world of work.
Certainly. Thanks, Jenny. So my name is Chris Barman. I work at Fiat Chrysler Automobiles. I'm the head of electrical and electronics engineering for North America. This is extremely topical for us. Obviously, the direct link is STEM itself, and that would come into the team that I work with day to day in problem solving and the design of automobiles, also applicable to manufacturing. But what others may not understand under the umbrella of what we do as a company, we need critical thinking and problem solving and that knowledge within our public relations area, our marketing area, our finance area, because we make such a complex product. There needs to be an understanding of that product to be effective within those other organizations that we have to interface with.
Perfect.
Good morning. My name is Sonia Ponce, and I currently am one of the partners of 313 Construction, a demolition company. But my background is actually in mechanical engineering. I started my career as a designer and then moved into technical sales. And from there, I moved into energy management. I would not have been able to make such leaps had I not had a firm foundation in STEM, had I not had that engineering background, that foundation to build upon, and the problem-solving skills, the critical thinking skills that I gained during those formative years being educated, I have used to do many other things in life. So they're very key.
My name is Mike Bolodzis. I'm an infrastructure and cloud consultant for a consulting company here in Detroit, CDH. I've been in the technological field for about 20 years now, consulting for about 9. My background is, actually I started here from Detroit, born and raised. My interest in technology peaked here in Cass Technical High School, where I took the electronics program. So I had a good firm foundation for what I was getting into. As a consultant, I deal with many different industries. I see how technology and information systems affects all industries, from manufacturing, from healthcare, from food services. Pretty much all industries are affected by information technology. So it's good to have a firm grasp on what information technology is and how it can apply to all these different industries.
Sonia.
Nina, actually.
Sorry.
My name is Nina Abubakari, and I am the managing partner of Fern Health Solutions. I also was born and raised in Detroit. My high school is actually Renaissance, so for whatever that means. It's okay. But I think working in healthcare for over 16 years and being in different facets of healthcare, you can definitely tell immediately that there is a connection, certainly now, between technology and healthcare in our industry. Certainly with the advent of electronic medical records and so forth, there's a lot of technology that's coming into that industry. But the one thing that I will say is that as a professor at a community college and at university level for the last probably about 12 years, one of the things I can tell particularly that is missing is that many of our students are memorizing. They are not comprehending the material. And so I have a lot of students that get A's but really don't understand the material. So hopefully as we continue with technology, we'll address some of those competency issues.
Jivak. Awesome. My name is Jivak. I'm made in India. I came here 13 years ago. Thank you. And I right now work with a company or design studio called Sundberg Farrar, which was born right here in the city of Detroit in 1934. So we are an 82-year-long consultancy, a design studio. So I'm an industrial designer, and we are an industrial design studio. And what we do is literally, we make everyday objects, but we make everyday objects to be more useful, to be more usable, and last but not the least, to be as beautiful as possible. And we can perhaps try to talk more about that. We sit in the world of beauty, the beetles, the butterflies, everything is beautiful in the natural world, everything can be beautiful in the man-made world. If an object works good, why can't it look good? And that's why I need to add, I think I'm here on the panel to add the A in the STEM, to make it STEAM, the A for arts, and there is an amazing kind of, and I would say, depth to how things can be more aesthetically beautiful too.
So do you all hire? Or at least you work with people who do hiring.
So, yep.
What are you seeing are the shortcomings of the people, and you started getting at it, are coming to you thinking they're perfectly minted to take on jobs in the real world? Whoever wants to. Yep.
To second on what Nina said, a lot of students or people that are just starting out in the field, technology field, they know the information from a book. They're book smart. They know it, but they don't know how to apply it. So application is very important, especially like it was noted in the introduction. Certain pieces affect something else. If I'm doing an email migration, I have to follow a checklist of 20 things. If I forget to do one of those, email's not going to work. And if email doesn't work, that's not good. But it's not just memorizing, having practical knowledge and application of how things work.
Chris, how about you? Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No worries. I was just going to also just kind of piggyback on what Nina and Jivak said, because it's also about having some creativity. If you understand how things work, if you understand the foundation, then you have then you can build on that with creativity to solve problems at any level.
Right. So, Chris, how do you see also how failure fits into this?
Yeah, failure is a big part of it, but it should be embraced. Because you learn from your failures, and from that also you learn that there's more than one solution to a problem, and that's okay. There's not always one right answer. It's the trade-offs in the system and going forward and understanding what the right balance is for the application. And sometimes I think that's difficult for people to understand that. That is just naturally part of the process, and it should be embraced.
Can I add?
Of course.
The earlier question and then this question. So what we see into any person we want to hire is that apart from the immense nature of IT and technology around, we need to have a person who can build things with his or her own hands. And again, when I say build, not to the extreme production level quality, but get a piece of cardboard, get a piece of wood, get a piece of foam, start thinking and immersing yourself in the world of that product. So that's the main thing, because we are known to build. When I say we, humans, we love to build. We need to have that person understanding the building part of it in that low fidelity world. And about the failure, if I may add a little bit more, we all read about failure, right? Embrace failure in Harvard Business Review or Wall Street Journal. It's good to embrace failure, but not out in the market. The world I'm talking about, iterative world, when you're working with cardboard boxes and plywoods and foam materials, that's the area when you want to fail fast and fail often, not literally spending millions of bucks out in the main market. There is a step and cadence to it, rather than just going that failure is good. So we need to understand in what relevancy and what construct the failure has to be good.
So do you all specifically or your firms work with K-12 educators or schools to bridge that in any kind of explicit or specific ways?
Yeah, we're involved. We're a supporter of the Science Center in that, but we also are highly involved in FIRST Robotics in engaging in the community from that factor. We're also part of, we have Motor Citizens and with United Way. So we actively engage in a number of channels because, as we stated earlier, there's no one approach in that, so we need to actively engage multiple facets of the community.
Anybody
And
else?
this might be surprising. We are a design studio, industrial design studio, but last year our governor, Michigan's governor, formed a specific design council. The Michigan Design Council, I sit on that board, and the predominant intent is make sure that we work with the incoming K to 12 students and beyond or less, and make sure we let them understand what we need in the professional world. So that's a great council, and I think we are the only state who has that industrial design word in the address of the governor.
In my work as an energy engineer and as a mechanical engineer, I've been involved in an organization called ASHRAE for many, many years. And through that organization, I have participated in the science fair and in other opportunities to mentor middle school and high school students in the STEM arena.
For those of you who were around earlier or just in general, the notion of the informal sector, the out-of-school time that kids spend, and at home, right, versus what is offered up at school and the opportunities they have there. So I'm glad we're talking about informal. Can you think of things that you all are maybe even motivated to think about doing now to connect with educators or schools? Either as an industry or as an individual? Go ahead.
Say, just coming up here today, I walked through the construction fair, right? So we've got over 1,000 students from DPS schools here today that are learning about various aspects of the construction industry. I was not aware that this was taking place, and I was just so excited to walk through all of this and see some of the people that I work with and friends down there as well. So I will definitely be bringing, my company, but also the organizations that I work with that are in STEM to participate in this in future years. So absolutely.
Yeah, good for you. Nina.
No, I think, one of my mantras is if you know it, you should teach it. And so that is why I particularly chose to be a professor on that university and a level to make sure that I could prepare students for coming into the healthcare industry in particular. And so whether they be pre-med students, pre-surgical students, pre-nursing, or so forth, again, the issue that I continue to see is that our students are very good at memorizing and not very good at the piece of competency. And even as a professor, using the tools that we're given to even approach the issue of competency are limited. So I appreciate the comments and questions about how do we prepare not just the student, but also the families in the education industry to bring these students forward so that we are better prepared to teach them in a way that goes down that vein of competency and not just memorization. I don't know that teachers or professors are given all the tools that they need to actually do that.
In fact, there are a lot of people who think that that is the step, right? It really is bridging, that there's plenty of supply of information and connections to be made and resources out there in some ways. I mean, there can always be better and more of them, but it's really as much a demand side problem as building people's appetite for this way of approaching, whether it's formal instruction in schools or engaging kids in informal settings. So I'm interested in what you all might have to say about this building will to really make these changes. The maker movement, I think, and other hands-on experiential efforts that lots of folks are recognizing get kids engaged. And I think even parents are starting to expect and demand more of that kind of experience for their kids and not have it be all rote. So I'd just be interested in how we build this as a, something that's bigger than working with kids in one classroom or one school.
And the maker
Go ahead. I mean, we couldn't.
Go ahead.
And the maker movement is really right now the perfect timing for everybody to start diving deep into it. And that's what I think Scott mentioned or briefly mentioned in the morning. It's not just the intrinsic value that comes out of it, but when you build something yourself, the instrumental value comes out of it. When you actually are a part of that process, and if you do that with your kids, your own kids or the school kids, that's how the project-based learning, scenario-based learning absolutely would change the entire game.
Perfect.
I was going to say, one of the things that we really, that would, I think, help is bringing art back into the equation. Art is one of the ways that we integrate knowledge, and it helps build that creativity. In addition to being an engineer, I'm also a writer. I'm a poet, and I've worked in the DPS school system. And one of the things that I recognize with the students is that they have a real difficult time just being creative. They're so used to having to answer the question correctly and checking the right box that they don't even know how to be creative anymore. And we really need to begin to foster that and to integrate that into the classroom curriculum. That needs to be a part of what the students are graded on. That needs to be a part of what we're expecting them to learn.
Mike, I want you to go. Go
I'd
ahead.
like to add one more to that. Really great point about the art thing is, that was a good point. And one more to everybody to know is, it's not again the days of a starving artist. Artists also do get paid well, really well in the professional world.
Absolutely.
Because I had my argument back in India with my mom, like, I want to be an artist, I go to artist school, and she said, no, you have to be a doctor or engineer, just a stereotypical mom. But no, it's pretty good. There is good value to it, and there is value in making things more useful, meaningful, purposeful, as long as you understand the cause and purpose behind it. So it's really influential.
And the hands-on is very important. I brought up the example earlier with Jenny with Minecraft. My son likes to play Minecraft. And then when I actually saw what he was creating and doing, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a great learning tool. And even here at the Science Center, they had where you can make little programs and see the result of that program. I think if they see the results, if it's like, oh, just read this and do it. No, if they get their hands on it and are able to create a program, create a very simple mobile app, because I'm speaking from an infrastructure point of view, that'll just pique their interest and their excitement. They're going to want to learn more.
And I would just add from the arts perspective of it, we work closely with our design office, and obviously they make very, beautiful products in that, but most of the designers can talk about the effects of their design and the aerodynamics on the vehicle as well as many of the engineers, because they understand the cause and effect. They understand that's important for our fuel economy requirements, and so it again brings that problem solving back even to those that are traditionally from a creative area.
We spent a little bit of time in my office recently coming up with all the synonyms we could think of for the notion of student-centered learning, which has become quite a buzz in education. We came up with 30 synonyms that advocates and organizations and others are using to put a spotlight on that notion that you want kids to be at the center of how you think about the importance of education, the way education is delivered, and the ultimate implications, right? So I'm intrigued with this idea of kids owning their work, right? And recognizing, and that's why I pushed on the issue of failure, by the way, because I think if kids, and all of us, if we're too intimidated to try something at all, because we're afraid we'll fail and don't see the notion of iterating as part of what you do to get from point A to point B or C. So I'm just interested in this idea, again, of engaging kids, motivating young people with real things they're interested in.
Jillian, go ahead after you.
I was going to say, the thing though, and I agree that art is definitely, and creativity is definitely important, but I think as teachers we tend to make that something that is other, right? Or something that is separate, or take it out of context. And so when I think about the issue of health or even the sciences, there's a science experiment every time I cook. Right? So instead of making a chemistry experiment something that is other, it's actually something that you probably do every day.
Yeah.
And thinking about art and all of that, there is art in nature, right? And so if we can recognize that it is not something that's other, but it's something that we actually interact with every day. And some of the games, these are future urban planners, right? So they're not doing something that's so different or so other. It's something that they have incorporated and can continue to recognize as incorporated in the things that they already do.
Talking about, coming back to your question about kids to own what they want, and again to the games or gamification. So I think we also need to let them self-select what they really like. Like literally coming back to the morning session by Scott, we talked about gamification, right? Means John Nash, he won a Nobel Prize for gamification and strategy. I will try to paraphrase him, that which is applicable for the big corporations or countries or whatever it is, but it can again come back to the granular world of kids too. What he said was, if every company knew the strategy of every other company and still chose not to change their own strategy, they are in Nash equilibrium. So what he says is, don't get reactive to what's happening out in the market. Do fundamentally what you really want to do and go ahead with it. And the same thing literally applies to the kids also. Not every rabbit can swim. He can just run faster. So if a kid loves something, let him self-select. He can build his career or his intensive training in that primary subject. And this world is full of collaboration nature nowadays. We all are cross-disciplinary teams. If there is other things needed, other people will come and help him or her. As long as they develop their own intensity in what they love, then they will literally bring something to the table. You cannot bring just loose ends. There has to be one strong anchor that you are known for, and let him or her self-select.
Nice. Did I see another hand? So I'm going to ask each of you to think about an experience you had as a young person, whether in high school, junior, middle school kind of age, and maybe an educator attached to that experience or an informal, helpmate in the sense of whether it was scouts or something, and tell me how that puts you on a track to what you're doing today. Lightning round.
Yeah, so I actually grew up on a farm and had the opportunity just through necessity to be exposed to machinery and fixing equipment as it was time to harvest the crops, and Dad was in the field and needed to get it done. And through that really came to love problem solving and working on machinery. And even though I lead an electrical team, I'm actually a mechanical engineer by training. But it led to, again, understanding problem solving and how to find a solution.
It's relevant, isn't it, to putting food on the table?
Very much.
Very relevant. My experience probably would be in middle school, a science teacher, Mr. Schlesinger, and just participating in the science fair, right? Working through an experiment, going through the rigor of, asking the questions and finding the answers and finding the interconnections of things, and just his mentoring and the time that he was able to take with me to explain things and make things interesting, right? And answer my questions and take my questions seriously. And our classroom was equipped with the materials and small enough so that he had the time to take with me.
I'd have to go back to high school in the 10th grade electronics class, Mr. Miller. I wrote a simple, just 5 or 6 code program to move a robotic arm and pick something up. And that was it. That just ignited me.
The spark.
This is what I want to do. I want to get into programming, and I'm not doing programming now, I'm in infrastructure, but that was the spark I needed. Just that one little thing. I saw it work. I created it, like we were talking about creating earlier. That was it. The rest is history.
Yeah.
It's always going to be a science teacher for me. One was actually my aunt. We had a project to make sure that we understood the difference between pinnate and palmate leaves. She actually took me out into her neighborhood and said, look at this tree, look at this leaf. This is what it is. It's not just a textbook thing. These are things that actually exist in real life. And she also went to the Easter market and got a lung of a cow and played with it in class. And I was like, oh my goodness. Why would you do that? But it was life-changing. So definitely science teachers.
It will be difficult to top that. Again, I was raised in India, so it goes back to my younger days. I'm a designer, I'm an artist, but my favorite teacher was a mathematics teacher, and here's the reason why. The first class that he started, he showed us pictures of Taj Mahal and then zoomed in into showing all the lattice and the amazing intricacies in the design, and then he broke them into angles and trigonometry and geometry. So he literally showed us everything in the world of art, monuments, construction, museums, churches, schools, how they are built, the plans of any churches and the golden mean ratios over there. And then he came back to mathematics and say, okay, now you need to understand why 2 + 2 is 4 or beyond. And that's why I just still love the way he used the real laws of mathematics to say how they're going to be applicable in the world before he taught us the rules. And that's why I love calculus and algebra also. It's pretty rare.
So I'm going to ask another question or two, but you guys could start thinking about queuing up if you have questions about how to make the connection between the work in schools and the informal sector around these ideas of building engineering and technology literacy with the folks up here. So please feel free. to start queuing up. I am going to go back to this public will question, because one of the things that's vexed me as I've been in this education field a long time is that one of the impediments to change, frankly, and doing things differently in schools and embracing some of the very things we're talking about today is parents. Parents have trouble, some parents, not all parents, but there are parents who think it looks kind of new agey or wacky, and how are we assured that our kids are really learning? Because it's not just sit down and learn it and be able to regurgitate it. So I don't know, again, whether any wisdom, advice you would have for really elevating this idea of hands-on and kids getting really engaged in what they're doing in ways that look different than they did 20 and 40 and so years ago. And whether you have experience trying to get that kind of effort off the ground.
I don't. I'm not an educator per se, but I will say that as a professional, one of the things that I have to engage in is continuous education, right? So I'm always learning. Things are always changing in my workplace, and so part of I would expect then that education would be changing as well, and so part of the jobs of the education community would be to communicate that to parents and provide that information in a way that they can understand, and so that they can understand the relevancy of why education doesn't look today like it looked 20 or 30 years ago.
Right, right.
I try to help other parents, friends of mine and other professionals that I know, to try to see that technology is moving forward. The way businesses work today, the way things are done, are different than they were done 20 years ago. 20 years ago, how many people had cell phones? Did anyone believe we would have mini computers in our pockets? No. So things are changing. So the way students learn, kids learn, also needs to change to keep up with the modern day workforce.
I think too that a lot of times even professors, we don't work in silos. We don't work by ourselves. And as parents, they should not do that either. I think, not being a parent, but I know, I can imagine that a parent wants to be the one who knows it all to their children. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you do not have to do that on your own. And I think, especially with parent organizations that are already existing within the school, there are engineers in that parent group. There are, professionals in that parent group that you can glean information from to help inform the information that they're getting and supplement the information that they're getting from school. So I think parents need to get away from needing to feel like they know it all and actually partner with other educators or even other parents to supplement that information.
Very good.
I think as a parent means I have a 7-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. They're both monkeys, by the way. They're certified monkeys, means literally. So I think is, and again, I was born and raised in India. Most of my time was climbing trees or doing some odd things. I think means I let my kids wear helmets and all those things when we are learning to bicycle, but sometimes we protect them too much.
Thank you.
There has to be some good time, curated, relevant time where you are there and they can still play with a small knife or play with fire or literally go and take that jump across the stream. Nothing will happen. If a bone breaks, it heals in 2 months. It's not a big deal. But we have to let them do a little bit more of their, I would say, the non-cage that we always have around them, and let them explore a little bit, and then they develop the respect of it. I'm not saying literally giving a knife to my kid and letting him play on his own, but if he understands the sharpness of it by cutting something else, he understands the respect. If I go back to India or you go to an Eskimo anywhere, they all have knives, they all play with fire, and a young kid also does that. If you are known to respect what it can do, good or bad, then I think you develop the need for those tools, right? Means we saw Peggy Carr in the morning with the hammer in hand. It's a basic tool. If you know when you strike a hammer on your nails or fingers, at once you will know, then you will never do that mistake again. We have to let them explore a little bit more.
Yeah, I've got something to say to Peggy about, I was so duped by that glasses thing. I am the earnest girl trying to solve a problem. I just wanted to underscore too, I loved you folks as you were picking up on the lifelong learning theme that I think we also want to ensure we elevate here today. Please. Lifelong learning opportunities, I should say.
Good morning still. Good mid-morning.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep it short. My name is Tanisha Moore. I'm from the Office of Science Education, and I want to say how eloquent and how brave and how great you guys are in terms of sitting here, fielding questions, talking about your life experiences. The one thing that I like that's being lifted is that students are now curators of their own learning. Absolutely. They're builders of their own knowledge. We are in the classroom trying to create a student-centered environment where students are working in groups, working in cooperative learning settings, and we're asking the teachers to do the same. We know that technology is moving very quickly at a fast pace, faster than some of us can even keep up with. With that being said, we have to keep into account, we have to take a couple of things into account that I would ask that we ponder as we return to our lives. Technology is not as readily available as we'd like to think it is at home. That's number one. And number two, we have to think about children living in urban settings and living in poverty, and thinking about is there a sufficient amount of time that they have that's dedicated to their studies and to bettering themselves as an individual? Because when you think about it in that aspect and in that perspective, when you're trying to survive, how important is that future? How important is it forecasting your future when you're just trying to get through the day? So I want us to think about helping students, you know, from our positions where we are, in corporations, from the state of Michigan. Ms. Carr, you are an actual gem. That little glass thing you did, I was like, oh my God, I don't have any glass. I had readers. I don't have them to lend to her. So yeah, you got us all. But we have to think about the work that we do, and how can we do that work in a manner where it is affecting our students and it is affecting their lives, whether it be supporting, whether it be volunteering our time, whether it be, you know, just doing something to help. As far as the technology is concerned, Detroit Public Schools, we have technology. But what happens when our students go home? Do they have the necessary technology to do the work? Do they have a support system at home? Are their parents able to assist them? Do their parents have the capacity that it takes to do the Common Core mathematics? Okay? I call in sick when my cousins ask me about Common Core mathematics. So, and I'm a scientist. I mean, this is something that we do. And I will say that our curriculums are rich that we use. We use those Michigan science standards that are based on the cross-cutting concepts, disciplinary core ideas, and the scientific and engineering practices. So we're doing all that we can do to come up to speed to build capacity with the teachers. We have to build capacity with our students and with our parents as well. And I would just encourage you to think about ways that you can support, ways that you can come in to assist. But you have to think about a child not just as an academia or academic being, as a whole child. Nobody likes to wake up hungry. Nobody likes to go home to uncertainty, to wonder if the police are going to be at my house. Or nobody likes to think about, am I going to make it home safely?
That's
so,
exactly.
Yes.
I totally appreciate that.
Thank
We've
you.
got you bet. Thank you very much. Does anybody want to say anything or respond, please?
Sure, I can. And that's, I think, an extremely a good point to bring up, and one that does not get, I think, the amount of attention that it needs to. And I think, again, when you have communities that are suffering for so many different reasons, the thing that we have to think about is not operating within a silo. Just as an example, my parents maybe at times may not have had all of everything. We had an encyclopedia, you know, and certain things like that to supplement our knowledge. But the ability of a community to have a library where you can have access to not only books but internet and all these other resources, I think can help. I don't know that it solves all of the problems, but I think it helps. And so when thinking about, again, the issue of parents and having them help a child's learning, we really have to think about communities.
Yep.
And with the issue of violence and safety and all those other things, if we think about community as a whole and not just this is a parent's responsibility, when I was a kid, all of the parents looked out for us. You know, it was more of a community. And using those resources, I think, to help supplement what's happening in the schools that might be light years ahead, I think is going to be extremely important in attempting to address that concern. So thank you for that question.
And I would add to that, at FCA, we're very fortunate for that 18 hours of paid time for community service, and many of our individuals at FCA participate in United Way programs that are the summer food service programs for those children, or the weekend programs, and that for those children that are struggling with, hey, how do I just get a meal, and what am I doing with the day-to-day? There's book programs, there's many where we're not the experts, but we're definitely willing to give our time to help support those programs and strengthen the community.
I just think it's important, and I'm glad the point was made, to make sure that we're attending to some basic foundational stuff, because some of this isn't even relevant if we don't have kids who are well fed and, you know, aren't dealing with trauma and those things. So, yes, thank you very much. Yes, sir. Please tell us who you are. And
I'm Andy Walker, retired AT&T. I had a question regarding communication skills with STEAM, because I found that with the collaborative teams, and oftentimes you're in different time zones, you have different accents, different strengths, how important communication skills are to actually getting the job done effectively too. And I wanted to hear some comments on that.
that's perfect. And I was going to amend just a little bit. I had a similar question about, because technology changes to facilitate that, right? So that's actually relevant, right, to what we're talking about. So please, you all.
I think communication is extremely important. First of all, to collaborate within the teams. We have all kinds of technology I can talk to someone in India, for example, and in Germany and England, but to actually be able to communicate. One of the first questions you asked earlier is what is one of the things we're seeing or not seeing is some of these kids are extremely intelligent, more intelligent than some of us in the professional workforce, but they can't communicate it. They don't know how to elaborate. They don't know how to express what they want to do and how they want to do it. And that's extremely important in not just information technology, but engineering and arts in all aspects of life, from a young age to an adult. But communication, if you don't have it, it's going to hinder a lot of things in life.
So Mike, would you let me take another way?
Absolutely.
So communication, I'm going to go to the basic question, I think the foundational communication things. Yeah, absolutely. We need some basic level of communication, not a thick accent like me. But anywhere you go in the world, everybody travels around. I go to China here and there. I think your work is your communication. If you are going to communicate something and your work completely makes it completely apparently true, your accent, your language, your articulation, your comprehension, understanding, it literally doesn't matter as long as your work is literally good. And that's why I think the communication is good, right? Means we talk about taking your thought further, not your just marketing, PR. Everybody loves communication, right? Means it's good to have your eyeballs. Everybody works to have your eyeballs on your website, to have more thumbs and likes and friends. They are all good only if your product is good. Right. So communication is good, but to start with, it all bases on the fundamental thing of what you, and when I say product, it might be a product, a service, an experience, a kiosk, a packaging, it might be anything. If that is good, communication helps take it further. It doesn't override the honesty and authenticity of your product.
But I'm going to go to Chris, but Jivak, doesn't it? But I think some of the questions also about to even get to the product, to build and, you know, design and build the
basic level has to be
you
there.
have to have cross-department kinds of approaches and...
Yeah, but the basic elements have to be there. You need to know the semantics of grammar to make sure at least you're communicable. But I don't think you need the highest sophistication of articulation of how you are making it more polished and slick presentations. So when we also go right now in the real world for pitching our proposals, it's not a slick presentation. Yeah, we have plenty of people doing that. But if your authentic value is there, all the other things literally mean nothing. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, nothing. But your product has to be good. You have to
Chris
be good.
first, and then,
Yeah, so I think the other thing, though, that we start to see, at least with, you know, the youth or young adults that are coming into the workforce is, well, I sent an email, so that means it must be okay. and we're starting to lose that, hey, you have to close the loop on communication. And there are times where you have to sit face-to-face with people, because even if you're all English speakers or you're all the same language speaker, you can be talking past each other as far as what you mean. So it's really critical to do that confirmation loop, and then when you start to add in the international elements and in the different languages as well, it becomes even more and more important. But I think it's really stepping back, and that's an area where you have to reprogram a bit some of the, you know, younger professionals that are coming into the market, that texting and email has its place, but nothing can, you know, be just good old face-to-face communication.
Do you want to add?
I was just going to say part of what Chris said, but also that the interrelation between communication and STEM, having that firm foundation, understanding what is going on, right, allows somebody to be able to communicate that clearly to somebody else. And that's really what is most important in the communication, not necessarily how it looks, but being able to transfer knowledge, information from one person to another.
Yeah.
Right? And being able to do that at the speed of business, because as technology changes and business decisions are being made very quickly, we need to be able to get that communication from one point to another exponentially.
Yeah, I'm like Tanya. I got to, put on my hat as a publisher and somebody who runs a media company. I mean, 20 years ago, we were still doing things like we had going back nearly, well, I shouldn't say that. When I got in the field, we were still using manual typewriters. We were still using, old back shop kind of printing operations. But in the past 20 years with the internet, we have been completely, to use an overused word, disrupted. And we've had to all learn new communications platforms. We've had to all learn how to work together across departments, because we weren't going to survive if we didn't work not just as an editorial function, meaning the journalists and the people doing the writing, but also you needed to bring the business people to the table who would say, here's what it's going to take to sustain this organization, not inappropriately, right? Editorial is separate from business, but you got to work together to be sustainable, and technology. You've got to have it. Okay, I got a question from online.
Hi, yes, we have a question from our webcast audience. Panelists have touched on this, but I'd like to hear a little more about what other panelists have to say. Esther Worker with Esri asks, what specifically can companies in the U.S. do to encourage K-12 technology and engineering literacy efforts?
What was the last part?
What can companies do to encourage K-12 technology and engineering literacy efforts?
In their schedules.
So you can repeat it one more time.
It's really
kind of...
Yeah, it's asking you guys to think about what could happen in schools, in the education sector, to make more time for some of this effort. Would you agree? Did I ask that? Rephrase that?
What specifically can companies do to encourage education of this kind?
Yeah. So from our perspective, we are a small studio. We are not as big as FCA. From our perspective, we try to invite schools, their professors or their teachers with their kids, including literally kids as high as this, to the studio. We will not share our secrets, but we will share our ideas and show them what is the life of an industrial designer in the real world. So we do that very often. I know most of you might be local, might not be local, but if you want to arrange a field trip to our studio, we'll plan it, but we can make it happen. And that's what we do from our perspective for the world.
Yeah.
Along those same lines, I think working with the folks who are writing curriculum to make sure that the skills that are needed in the workplace are integrated into the classroom. When I was in undergraduate, one of the things that my university did, I went to Purdue University, and one of the things that they did in their relationship with many of the employers is they found out that engineers had a difficult time communicating. So then Purdue said, okay, one of your core classes is going to be technical communications, and that became part of the curriculum. It was a requirement in order to graduate. And I think that businesses can do something similar with the local community colleges, the local universities, and DPS, the local high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools as well, to look at what skills are we going to need, and as businesses look at their futures, what are we going to need in 5, 10, 15 years, and start working backwards so that those skills are input into the education system earlier, so that when the students come out, they're prepared. Not for yesterday, but for tomorrow.
Right. Anybody else? Do we have another question from online?
Sure, we have another question from the web. Latanya Jones with Power.org Math asks, which foundational math skills can we focus on to help prepare youth for internships, co-op experiences, and placement exams in tech and engineering fields?
Foundational math skills.
Math skills that can assist with entry into the workforce.
Geometry, trigonometry, calculus, all of it.
Depending on what they want to get into.
There are wonderful resources where you can go and find a profession, online, and you can back map what you're going to need to be able to go to, what you have to have accomplished in high school, and what kind of courses you have to have taken, so that then when you go to college and you decide to pursue one career or another, that you're ready to do it. So I'm a big believer of putting fingers on the keyboard, and you can do some searching about math requirements to be a blah. And there are actual sites that have back-mapped that. I don't know the name of them, sorry.
Apart from the answer, consensus is everything, but maybe specifically the newer world requires more analytics. Literally, if you look at how the things are going. So coming back to statistics and analytics, that might be, if you are looking for something specialized, I think the world is going to expand literally in that area from mathematics perspective, and there is need of those mathematicians, PhDs in any company you might believe, any food company, or category agnostic company will need more and more analytics mathematicians.
Yeah, statistics,
Absolutely.
logic, that's great. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Johnny Moy, and I'm a research associate with the International Technology and Engineering Educators Association.
Well, there you go.
And we are, we just completed the third year of a 4-year study concerning students learning better by doing in schools. And we created, long story, but we created some instruments to determine, based on the NGSS, Common Core, and Standards for Technological Literacy, we've correlated some statements for teachers to answer yes or no to, and the teachers, 99% of the teachers, of the thousands of teachers surveyed, agree that students learn better by doing, and over 96% said that they would do more, they would have their students do more in class if they had the time and resources. I guess all that being said, we were thinking that students learn better by doing based on the information. In the workforce, when a student comes to you, what is more important? Is what a student knows or what a student is able to do?
I would say a combination of both. But a lot of people know a lot of things, but again, I'm going back to the application. So I would have to lean more towards application, what they know how to do. Someone may not be a straight A student. They could be a C average student, but they can make the best designs and come up with a great program and be artistically inclined. So it's really, I think it's more of how they know how to apply things.
Yeah, and I think it's important also that as they're getting their education, actually they seek out internships or co-op programs to help them with, getting that knowledge of learning and hands-on and doing it. It makes them, I think, better prepared when they finally make their entry into the workforce.
I think it's... No, go ahead, Sonia.
I was going to say, one of the other things that's important, I think, for what the student brings when they come looking for a job is curiosity, right? Engineering and STEM, these fields are about being curious about the world, right? And being willing to learn and use that information to better understand how this world works. And if somebody brings that to the workplace, that plus the foundation that they've got through their STEM education, they can go far. They can do just about anything.
So I think John asked the question if it was what they have done or what they will do. I think none of them. The main thing is what drives the kid, what are their passions. If you right now go and get the best intelligent kid of the school, and he doesn't have the hunger in the area you want to employ him or her with, it's literally of no use. It'll be more turnover ratio for your company. They'll come in and leave. So it's not just getting the best of the kids. By the way, right now the best of the kids are employed in the completely wrong zone. They're employed by Google and companies like that, where their only reason is to get more and more people visit their website. So that's where the intelligent kids are going. But as long as the passion alignment is there in what they want to do, I think then that's magic.
Perfect. We got our last question, and we're going to wrap up on time. Deadline girl here.
Yes. Hi, I'm Latonia Jones. I posed the math question. I have 20-plus years experience as a math teacher, principal, and now as the founder of Power Org Math here in Detroit. I'm also a former director of developmental education, which means you had some challenges. You weren't prepared when you entered higher ed. My question is, what types of specific math challenges do you see? It's easy to say geometry, statistics, and to backtrack specifically, because when we engage with children and their families in scenario-based, problem-based, project-based experiences with STEM professionals, they're missing the foundational mathematics. And then I hear other professors saying, our students are not passing the interest level exams, therefore widening the STEM field. So what specific types of math competencies are you seeing that we can focus on as informal and formal educators to help prepare future employees to support our economy and our workforce?
I'm going to ask you, we're going to go down the row, and to the extent math, that's great. The specific skill, math, engineering, technology, that young people coming into the workforce don't have that they need.
Yeah, I think it needs to draw back to something that students can understand in the real world and relate to, and it's not just a theoretical problem where they're crunching numbers and that. And even for myself, on my experience, I didn't necessarily enjoy my engineering classes, but I had internships throughout my education that I started to make the correlation of why it was important to do calculus and Laplace transforms and all those other things that helped me become a better problem solver.
Just to actually just echo what Chris just said, and also to kind of borrow from Jivak earlier, he talked about a teacher who took an image of the Taj Mahal and then took that back to here's the application of mathematics, right? So if there's one skill that the students need to have, it is the ability to look at a problem and be able to understand how it breaks down into a math problem. Take a word problem, take a real world problem, take something in life and say, okay, here's the math that undergirds that, or here's the science that undergirds that. What's the real question here?
Going off that, I'm going to just get real simplistic. Word problems, because that makes them think.
Yeah.
That makes them problem solve. It's not just 1 + 1. How do you get to 2? So I think from a simple base, even elementary school, teaching them to start to comprehend, troubleshoot, even from a simple word problem.
I guess my answer is still going along that line of it's adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, right? Because all of the other advanced math classes build off of those basic 4 things. And I find that, I think the comment was made earlier, that we don't get to STEM until the 8th grade. Right? We don't focus on it until then, where now it's DAPSAT and it's fun and it's interesting and everybody's, coming around this child to help promote that education, but we miss them back in the 2nd grade, right? So I think learning those basic 4 math skills at an early age are the foundation to make sure that as that child continues to progress, those advanced math skills, as well as the analysis that goes with that, the problem solving, the word problems and so forth, those are better addressed when you address the basic ones.
Jivak, last word.
In one word, the last word would be visualization. That's what we will need from the kid. But let me try to put something a little bit more extra over there. Might take 1 minute. Let's say you are the teachers, we are the kids. I like to quote a 1965 quote by Ayn Rand in her book Atlas Shrugged. And I'm trying to paraphrase, but adding the teachers and the kids' words over there. If there exists more a tragic fool than the teachers, you, that they don't know they are the highest exponent of human's creative spirit. It is the artists or the kids who think they are their enemies. So we are all in here together. Everything is literally of the same continuum. We are nicely interconnected with it. We just have to make sure that we work with each other and take it further.
On that philosophical note, we're going to thank our panel for an interesting conversation.
Thank you, Jenny, for leading an excellent panel discussion. I'll add my 2 cents to the specific mathematical knowledge here. You need to be able to measure things, teaching how to measure things. So much of day-to-day life is estimating. We don't have precise things. You've got to be able to just make estimates. And then you've got to know the probabilities that something may or may not happen. So I hope that adds to your toolkit there. Let's thank again our panelists for giving us great insights into the connection between the world of scholarship and the world of work. So much of what we can do, we ask so much of our schools in this day and age, and yet the challenges continue to grow, and I think that it's individuals like yourself who are able to contribute to the lives of an individual student as mentoring, to be able to engage an entire school, or as the Michigan Science Center does, providing rich learning, hands-on engagement for hundreds of thousands of young people here. And Sonia, you had commented on the construction expo that is occurring outside as we speak. You know, those are real jobs that are really fun and exciting to do, and I want to congratulate Tanya Matthews on providing this backdrop and her energy and dynamism in the Michigan Science Center as the fitting place for the announcement of the TEL report card that was released today. So I want to thank again Tanya Matthews and her center staff. So I think today what we saw, this is actually a really important milestone. There was a glimpse of the future of assessment today and challenging some of the traditional orthodoxies of what assessment looks like, how it's conducted. The words and thoughts from the young people, eighth graders, talking about their experience with assessment was just invaluable for us to understand the importance, the central role that engagement plays. And we heard it up here. It's that passion is so important to make learning meaningful and engaging for that. So today is a starting point as we release the Technology and Engineering Literacy Report Card results. Hope that this inspires you to learn more and to continue the conversation, not only about what is assessed, but how it is assessed. You can join us on Twitter using the hashtag NAEP. You can also visit nationsreportcard.gov to see the full report and examine the data yourself. Additional materials, including a news release and the frameworks guide in the NAEP assessments, are also now available on the Governing Board's website, nagb.org. And in a few weeks, the archive version of today's webcast will be available there as well. Members of the media may contact the Governing Board's Public Affairs Specialist, Stefan Harris, if you have further questions. So to conclude our webcast and our in-person meeting, I want to thank you for your interest for this vital area of preparation for young people. So now let's go out and make stuff. Thank you.